Thank you for joining me. This is going to be Grotesquerie episode 7. Please hit the like, share the channel, comment, below. Let me know what your thoughts are. And let's get into it because when I tell you, didn't I tell you, there were twists coming. And in this episode, we get the twist. We get it all. And I'm so excited to share this with you. So, the detective has dinner out with her daughter and orderly Eddie. Remember, Eddie was the orderly that, kind of hit on her, had a little banter that night, took her to the AA meeting. Well, apparently the daughter and Eddie are in love. And the daughter also got cast on that show she wanted, which is called Half Ton Trauma. She's going to move in with Eddie in a gated community. The detective is soaking it all up and drinking again. She is just throwing back those drinks. So Detective Tyrone said, "Hey, I'm glad that you didn't hide it from me." She tells her daughter, that she and Eddie had a little thing, a dirty thing. And Eddie says, "Hey, don't get messy in front of your daughter. None of that happened." And then the detective proceeds to fat shame her daughter. Go on and on about the trials of intimacy with someone who is heavier. And her daughter's face just falls. She says her daughter's a lost cause. The father is an adulterer. And the daughter's like, if daddy did it, you drove him to it. So the detective wanted, to push folks to be as strong as her because none of y'all are strong. Y'all aren't ready for what's coming. So the detective tells Eddie that, the AA meeting was the worst first date she's ever been on. Eddie says that was not a date. That was actually something to kind of nudge her in the right direction. The detective goes on to finish her drink and says, no, she's grown because they tried to tell her it's time for rehab and tough love. So she gets up and she says, "You cannot gaslight a black woman because we know too much." And she drunkenly walks out of the restaurant. She kind of nudges into people on their tables and she gets into a red car. And I'm like, that's not her car. She starts throwing stuff out of the car while swerving down the road. She throws a jacket out. She throws some books out. And I'm like, detective, that doesn't look like your car. So detective goes to the doctor to talk about unplugging her husband. And I'm like, she's wearing the same clothes from dinner with her daughter and Eddie. Then it's confirmed it is the same night. So she drove from the restaurant straight to the hospital to talk to the doctor. The doctor says, "Has your daughter had a chance to say goodbye?" Detective is like, "I got medical proxy. He's been cheating on me the whole time and his mistress even works here." So the doctor, makes it easy for her and, kind of talks to her gently. And then Nurse Red walks in and says, "What is this meeting about with this degenerate alcoholic?" Nurse Red, you went a little hard on this. The detective says she's in charge. She has outsmarted the nurse. The doctor says, he'll just slip away when everything happens. He won't be in pain. The detective is like, what a shame. So the doctor says, "Do you need a priest?" And the detective is like, he's part Jewish. He was not practicing, so no. So the detective says, "Thank you for your attention and care," to the nurse. Okay? And the detective is like floating out of the office. You see her kind of just flowing to the vending machine where she picks up some Twizzlers. She goes to visit the husband's room and Nurse Red meets her there. And she's like, "They sent you to unplug him?" The nurse says, "How are you?" She's like, "I'm relieved." "And how are you?" The nurse is like, "You're asking me to end his life. How do you think?" So the detective is like, why fight? He was in love with you. That's the only grace I'll offer you. I wish I could do more, but I'm sad for you. "And I for you," said the nurse. So the detective reads his poetry. He's disconnected. Each monitor is unplugged. The daughter and Eddie are still at the restaurant. We're flashing to them. And they are sadly eating and drinking. And the spotlight turns on them. And then the spotlight turns off. Detective toasts her husband, tosses the book on his chest, and she drunkenly walks down the hall at the hospital. and the lights go out one by one behind her until all the lights go out. Then we cut to the cops standing outside in a heavy rain. You know how every crime scene they're kind of standing still? Well, this time they're outside in the rain and it is pouring. The coroner tells her, "Hey, you got a glow, detective. Did you get some?" She's like, "No, I just finished unplugging my husband last night and I had the best sleep of my life." Detective, come on. So, remember last time she actually was at a crime scene and she kind of, was accosted by someone and she, grabbed them and pow them in the chest, and it was a perpetrator and we never saw their face. Well, we're at the church. We're at the residence of the priest, Father Charlie. Turns out that's the perpetrator that the detective went pow and took down. So the detective puts her gloves on. She heads upstairs. She heads up into the whole, residence area of the church, and she finds IV drip bags. She finds life support machine stuff. She finds a statue that looks just like the previous crime scene where parts were sewn together. And, there was a book detailing the Bible verses, anatomy pages mixed in, and showing the inspiration for these previous crimes. So there was one thing that it also included a doctor note about a patient that should be removed from life support. And then we hear thunder crashing. Because remember, the cops are outside, but it seemed like thunder to kind of wake her up a bit. So then the cop, Jack, comes in and says, "Hey, it's a call from the governor. She's congratulating you for solving the crime." And the detective is like, "If I solve this crime, I'll be home in bed." But she takes the call. Sister Megan is sitting with the two priests, the nun, and the business suit that, remember previous episodes, Father Charlie was talking to when they told him to kind of pipe down. Well, she's having a review right now. And they're telling her to find a new line of stories. And I'm like, a new line. So Sister says she wants to report on good and evil. And the Cardinal acknowledges, readership has been up 5,000% and they have made the national news. And the priest said people are coming back to the church in droves. So Sister's like, "Oh, so is all of this a blessing?" Cardinal says, "Christ knew his crucifixion would be horrible and terrible, but it would bring the people to God, so he allowed it." Nice twist, Cardinal. Nice twist. So the Cardinal also said Father Charlie was a disturbing, evil man, but he knew the crux of faith was terror, that people want to believe and they have an appetite for the grotesque. So the priest said, "Feed the people the meal that satisfies their hunger." Now, this is what y'all are saying behind closed doors. One of your priests, one of your leaders, the pedal priest, remember he used to do the cycling? He's the perpetrator, and you're saying, let's feed into this? Well, Sister Megan takes this under advisement, and she says immediately, I'm going to take over as editor, publisher. I want 3 writers. I want final approval of everything published. Autonomy. Just hand me the keys. And she walks out. She knows she's got the power and she's got it on them. The detective is taken to the station by Cop Jack to sign some papers. And she's like, let me get this over with. And she walks into balloons and a festive atmosphere. They're all clapping for her. And Detective whispers to Jack, this is inappropriate. We just solved a homicide. This ain't it. Jack is like, "Hey, give them something to celebrate. Give them something." So she's handled a coffee cup with a little bit of liquor. She gives a toast, but she doesn't drink it. She puts it right down. The chief calls her into her office and says, "Look," and the detective was like, "Wait a minute. I'm not going to retire. I'm going to go over all my old cases and look at stuff." And the chief said she's not asking her to retire. And the detective's like, "Well, I won't resign, so you won't have to fire me. I dare you." And the chief said, "I won't, but they will. They're cutting the force 65%. She was flown out, the chief, to learn about policing technology. Detective said, "I solve these cases because I have an actual brain." And the chief is like, "They disagree. It's a full pension, full salary of $146,000 a year, plus Marshall, her husband's pension, and his life insurance. Chief is like, you could do all that you've ever dreamed of. The world is changing. And we close up on her lips saying, "Wake up, Lois, wake up." And the detective gets up and walks out of the office. And in the dark hallway, she looks closer at the balloons up against the window. The balloons from her party say, "Get well soon." Again, I'm like, is Lois, the detective, in the coma? I said this in previous episodes. Because there were different things, the beeping sounds in the background, the light going out behind her. They were giving signs of this, but we continue. So we hear Al Green, "How do you mend a broken heart?" I mean, that is one of my grandfather's favorite songs. Sister Megan is with Lois while Lois cooks up soup. Sister Megan is, thanks Lois for helping her get to this point in her career. She says the perpetrator was actually Father Charlie. Can you believe? Mass is standing room only. Sister is just bubbly excited about everything that's happening. And the detective is like, God works in mysterious ways. But I'm surprised at your quick recovery, sister. It's like it was all planned. It was theatrical, very showy. The detective says, was the priest ever in, like Arsenal cosplay? Because it seemed like you got shot in a very spot to avoid major damage. I'm asking because y'all seem so very close. So the sister's face seems sad and really drawn now. Sister asks Lois, "How many drinks have you had? You must be drunk if you're accusing me." The detective says, even with 2 drinks in, she's as sober as a nun. That is too funny since the sister is also drinking. And we turn to her shoes and we see the Sister Megan is wearing Louis Vuitton. The detective says the red sole was because back in the day you could always tell a sinner by the blood under their shoes. The sister says her reporting has led to the apprehension of Father Charlie. And detective said, no, that was me. My bullet to his chest is what caught him. She's like, but let's test your theory. Maybe you are innocent. Sister's like, maybe. Detective says we all know a lot more than we're willing to admit. And the sister looks menacing, and she is smelling the rosemary that the detective was just cutting on the cutting board. The detective is like, what can we do but pretend not to know? Sister goes, are you okay, Lois? Detective's like, no, I'm not. Though it was interesting, your involvement in this case. Always in the know, always a step ahead, always at the crime scene ahead of us sometimes. Always full of theories. I was like, the woman is like a dinosaur. You made me like you. She's like, I found books with the same images in Father Charlie's house like you had in your editing office. So the sister smiles sinister. Detective said, I always said whoever did this had to have experience with this sort of thing. Sister hurriedly gets a glass of water from the tap and she drinks it down. And detective goes on, says he didn't actually have that though, did he? Sister opens the window like it's getting really hot in here. Detective says he can use a carving knife, but in order to do this, he would need an accomplice, a twisted sister. Detective Father Charlie is a lady killer in every way, and here you show up. Like a Manson girl and a Disney character all in one. You wanted to lay it down, and the tension between y'all was at an all-time high. And you could not become that because you took a vow to the church. Sister's like, shut up! Detectives like, the viciousness of the murders to get folks back in the church is the only consumption you're going to get. She's like, holy sister, I cracked the case. Sister shouts out, blasphemy, speaks in tongues, and rolls her eyes to the top of her head. Then she grabs the knife and she attacks the detective. They brutally fight while Al Green is playing in the background. Now this is so sinister. Sister runs after the detective's bag with her pew pew in it and falls over out of reach. The detective drags her back over the dining room table, and she does get stabbed. The detective gets stabbed by the sister, but she grabs up the pot of soup, pours it on the sister, and knocks her over the head with the big pot. The detective pulls the knife out and crawls to her pow pow. The sister gets up, grabs the detective's legs, drags her to the kitchen, and stabs her in the back, turns her over, and keeps on knifing her. We cut to the daughter. The daughter is with her husband, Eddie, at the restaurant. And she's with who? Her dad. Her dad. Eddie has a long mullet too. The daughter and Eddie seems to be contemplating divorce, and the father is shocked. The dad said infidelity is something a lot of couples go through. The daughter's like, she can handle cheating. She would sleep with her new lab assistant if she could. Dad is like, what is this about? Eddie's like, he didn't grow up with a family, not like this one. He was in the foster system. And the daughter's like, all these excuses. His trauma, his drinking, his shame. He's married to a woman with 2 doctorate degrees and literally curing cancer. She tells him to shut the F up. She's like, why did I marry him? I'm ashamed to say that he can lay it down in the bedroom. I was like, girl, that is not a reason to marry him. Eddie goes on to say he doesn't mean to make excuses. He is grateful. Dora's like, he's been sleeping with mom these last 2 years. She says sorry that she had to bring a man like this home. The father takes, deep breaths. He has his drink and mutes out all the other voices. He then drives out in that same car that I asked before, Lois, is that your car? And he drives off. So we get to the detective in the hospital, being taken care of like he was. This is the reality. The detective is actually in the coma, and her husband is alive and around. He walks in the hospital and he sees them turning her over, taking care of her like we saw them do to him before. A nurse comes up. She has the pinup updo like Nurse Red, and it's more gray and she's older. He walks into the room and sits. She's hooked up to the machines just like he was. The doctor says, you're not there anymore, but I say I can feel you. He says it brings him in day after day to care for her and gives him hope. But that's not right. The love they had died when she wrapped her legs around her son-in-law. He says, I hope to God there's an ember inside still burning. I hope it can hear me and feel my fear, because it's time to go. He kisses her on the forehead, tosses out the flowers at her bedside. He goes to see the doctor and says, it's time to pull the plug. Donate her body to science, take care of her organs. I don't care. The doctor's like, how did you decide now is the time? He said, can we do it tomorrow, 10 a.m.? Marshall is very matter of fact. He doesn't want to hear it. He is done. He's like, haven't you been telling me it's time all this time, doctor? But the doctor tries to soothe things over and says, don't make a rash decision, Marshall. Marshall's like, thank you, I'm out. Marshall goes back to her and says, this is it. Good night. He walks out and the lights go out as he's walking down the hall. So we cut to Nurse Red. She is a cam girl, y'all. She is in red lingerie. She is dancing in front of the camera. And I'm like, Nurse Red? Now I can't call you Nurse Red. I'm going to call you just Red. She's like, we've been doing this for 6 years. You the big man on campus, freshman girls in and out of your office. Marshall is like, it's not the same. She's like, oh, so it's okay if you cheat, but not her? Marshall said the difference is you're not her daughter-in-law. Red is like, oh, it's the principle of the thing. Now Red is still dancing and giving the people what they want on the camera. So Marshall's like, it's sick, it's incest. And Red is like, they are not related. And Marshall's like, turn the camera off while I'm talking to you. She's like, the mic is off. There are 600 people here watching. I am not cutting off my, billable hours for you. She said, since the club is closed, this is her office. So Red was actually a dancer. She's like, you're the one who came over without calling. He's like, technically it's my place. I'm paying for it. So Red is like, Lois deserved to die, but what about your sins? You disappeared for 2 days with me on Valentine's Day, and you lied and said you were going to leave her. She said people in comas get affected by what you bring into their room, so you probably messed her up. She closed the computer, headed for the door. She's like, I can't be around you. Marshall's like, what is he supposed to do? She's like, I don't know, it's your apartment, and she leaves. And Red said that very thing we were thinking. Yes, Marshall going in there with all of this turmoil has had things shoveled up, mixed up in the detective's head while she's in a coma. We see Sister Megan as a detective, and she's looking over files. Now her hair is straightened out now. The police officer, Jack, he's a detective too, and he walks in. He said the department is being sued because Lois mishandled a case by a girl, Andrea, who is deceased now. Apparently she was unalived by her abusive boyfriend. And the detective says, the department wants to settle. Chief is like, no, Lois did what she was legally able to do. Andrea never pressed charges. She never corroborated that her boyfriend was the one who put hands on her. She said Lois would never roll over and take this. Jack is like, it's time. Marshall is pulling the plug now. The chief leaves to be there. We cut to Marshall signing all the paperwork, and there's a voiceover. The voiceover says, most people think the worst thing in a hospital is the unaliving of a patient. Charlie is the name of this doctor. So who we knew as Father Charlie was actually a doctor for the ICU recovery unit named Charlie. So the daughter is sitting there and she talks to the mom. She's like, I have been what you have ever wanted me to be. Everything I've done is all for your love. Marshall is upset that they're giving his wife a sponge bath before the unplugging. And the doctor's like, hey, this is what we do. This is the process. He then yells at the chief for coming. And the chief's like, I want to pay my respects. Marshall's like, you did not respect her. You were after her job and she loathed you. Wow, Marshall. The chief said that doesn't mean I don't admire her. I just want to say goodbye and thank you. Eddie now walks in. Marshall yells at him to get the F out, security. Eddie's like, I'm not leaving till I see Lois. And while Marshall is yelling and screaming, the daughter intervenes and says, I know you're hurting. I'm hurting. I'm angry too, but it's not about us. It's about her. Marshall's like, now is the time. Pull the plug. And the daughter's like, do not touch her, tells Dr. Charlie. Do not touch her unless you want to be litigated for negligent homicide. Marshall's like, I have power of attorney. Charlie had the shot ready to go into the IV, line, but he did not push it yet. The daughter says, back the up. And I'm like, Marshall may lunge for this girl. He may lunge and squeeze it to administer it to her. So, the daughter says, let him in. He's like, no, I get to say, I get to decide. He's like, pull the plug. Let her die the way she did, in turmoil and chaos and dysfunction. And the daughter's like, are you serious? If you do it this way, you not only lose her today, you lose me. She's like, I'm going to play her favorite song and sit with her. So the song is Stars by Nina Simone. So Dr. Charlie says, death is a tool and freedom from pain, a sweet emancipation of the soul. We switch to Lois in the kitchen. This is the dream state. She and Sister Megan are there, and Sister Megan is saying the same line while she stands over Lois. Lois is on the floor groaning, and Sister Megan puts down the knife, steps on Lois's hand with the heels, and takes up the weapon. Lois gets up, and they fight for the weapon. We can see through, like we're looking through a lit door. Everything around is pitch black, and we're looking through this lit door to the kitchen to see them fighting. Megan climbs on top of Detective Lois and starts punching her. They start cutting the life support machine off in reality. In dream state, Sister Megan grabs the weapon and points at Lois. In the real world, Eddie's sitting on the floor, head down. The chief is looking into the window from outside the hospital room. The daughter takes Lois's hand and says she forgives her, and she tells her it's okay to let go. We hear the flat line. The detective is now floating from the hospital bed and her eyes open. In the dream state, Lois grabs Sister Megan's feet. The sister drops to the floor and bashes her head. The heart monitor starts to beep. Everybody now is scrambling in the real world. Charlie's trying to figure out what the heck is going on, and he says her heart is taking a long time to slow down. We're back in the dreamland. Lois grabs the weapon. Pow, pow, Sister Megan, and her head explodes. Lois wakes up in the real world. Wow. Then we know there are 3 more episodes coming. In these upcoming episodes, Lois has to navigate dream world and real world because she really doesn't understand what's going on since she woke up from the coma. This was episode 7 of Grotesquerie. I hope you had so much fun watching it and recapping it with me. I wish to thank you for being here, and I hope to see you on the next one. In the meantime, like, share, subscribe, and be kinder to yourself today than you were yesterday. I'll see you in the next one.